I dated a woman when I was 29, she was 34 with a 6-year-old child, and to be honest, it was a disaster. I felt like I had all the responsibilities of a father, but none of them could say anything. The child's behavior was rude, and every time I tried to intervene, I was the bad guy. The biggest problem? She was constantly comparing me to her ex, even though she claimed he was horrible. It left me exhausted and, frankly, a bit traumatized. Now, when I try to go back there, I feel old. It's like I blinked and suddenly all my friends my age have a kid. It makes dating seem much more difficult than I expected. Does anyone else feel this way? How do you navigate dating in your 30s when you know you don't want to be a stepdad? The aftermath of that disastrous relationship lingered far longer than I expected. It wasn't just the exhaustion or the frustration of feeling like an outsider in my own relationship, it was the disillusionment. I had gone into that dynamic thinking love would be enough, that patience and effort would smooth out the rough edges. But I had learned the hard way that some roles couldn't be forced, and some situations just weren't meant to be. After that breakup, I took a long hiatus from dating. Initially, I told myself I was just busy, throwing myself into work and hobbies to fill the void. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was hesitant, even afraid, to go through something like that again. The thought of stepping into another relationship where I might once again feel like a stand-in father figure made my stomach turn. As time passed, I started to notice something unsettling. Everyone around me seemed to be settling down, or at least settling into roles that I no longer felt part of. My closest friends, guys I had spent my 20s with, going out, traveling, chasing ambitions, were now fathers, husbands, partners. Our conversations changed. They talked about daycare costs and bedtime routines, while I sat there, nursing a beer, wondering when the gap between us had grown so wide. I wasn't envious. I wasn't bitter. But I did feel out of place. So, I decided to try dating again, but this time, with clarity. I knew one thing for certain: I did not want to be a stepfather. It wasn't about disliking kids, but rather knowing my limits, understanding what I could and couldn't handle emotionally. I wanted a relationship that felt like an equal partnership, not a pre-scripted role I had to step into. At first, it was frustrating. Dating in my early 30s was vastly different from my 20s. The pool was smaller, and more often than not, I'd meet wonderful women who already had children, or at the very least, wanted them in the near future. It became a delicate balance of honesty and tact. Saying, "I don't want kids," felt like an immediate deal-breaker in some conversations. Other times, I'd see the disappointment in their eyes when I admitted I wasn't open to being a stepfather. It was exhausting, but I reminded myself that settling out of fear or convenience would only lead me back to the same unhappiness I had worked so hard to escape. Then, unexpectedly, I met Mia. She was different. Not in a cliché, swept me off my feet kind of way, but in the way she made me feel understood. She was in her early 30s, career-focused, independent, and most importantly, on the same page as me. She had dated men with kids before and, like me, had realized it wasn't what she wanted for her life. There was no awkward dance around the topic, no hesitance in our discussions. It was refreshing. We took things slow. I wasn't in a rush, and neither was she. Our conversations weren't centered around blending lives or making things work under the pressure of external responsibilities. We talked about books, travel, the little oddities of life that made us laugh. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was dating for myself, not for someone else's expectations. As months passed, I noticed something else: I no longer felt old. That creeping sensation that time had somehow slipped through my fingers started to fade. I realized that dating wasn't about catching up or finding a way to fit into what was left, it was about making my own path, one that aligned with who I truly was. The journey hadn't been easy. There were moments of doubt, moments of loneliness. But finding Mia, and more importantly, finding peace in my own decisions, showed me that there was no universal timeline for happiness. Some people find love early and build families. Others, like me, take a different route. And that was perfectly okay. Time has a funny way of reshaping perspectives. When I first met Mia, I was cautiously optimistic, relieved to have found someone whose desires aligned with mine. As the months turned into a year, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: stability. Not the kind that comes from routine or obligation, but the kind that grows naturally when two people are truly compatible. Mia and I built our relationship on mutual respect and honesty. We didn't rush into anything, there was no pressure to conform to an invisible timeline. For the first time, I wasn't dating to fill a void or to keep up with societal expectations. I was dating because I wanted to, because I genuinely enjoyed being around her. But despite the ease of our relationship, the world around us didn't always make things simple. Friends would ask, "So when are you two getting married, or do you think you'll change your mind about kids?" The latter question came more often than I cared to admit, always laced with the assumption that I was simply in a phase, that one day, I'd wake up and regret not wanting a family in the traditional sense. The truth was, I didn't regret it. But that didn't mean I was immune to doubt. Every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering, would I wake up at 50 and feel like I missed out? Would Mia? We had long, honest conversations about it, both of us reaffirming that our desires hadn't changed. She had her career, her passions, and her freedom, things she wasn't willing to trade for motherhood. And I, after my past experience, had no desire to relive the turmoil of being an unwilling parental figure. Still, society has a way of making you feel like an anomaly when you don't follow the script. I'd go to dinner parties where couples talked about their kids, exchanging war stories about sleepless nights and first steps. Sometimes, I felt like an outsider, even though I wasn't envious. I was happy with my life. I had Mia, my career, my passions. Yet, there was always this unspoken pressure lingering in the air, the idea that we were somehow missing out. Then, something unexpected happened. One of my closest friends, Greg, who had been married with 2 kids for years, pulled me aside one evening. "Man, I envy you sometimes," he admitted, swirling the last of his whiskey in his glass. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he shook his head. "I love my kids, don't get me wrong. But sometimes, I wonder what life would have been like if I hadn't just followed the expected path." It hit me then, there was no singular version of happiness. No matter what path we choose, we'll always wonder about the roads we didn't take. That night, as I lay beside Mia, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. We weren't missing out. We were simply living life on our own terms. The next few years with Mia were some of the best of my life. We traveled, we explored, we built a home that was filled with love, not the love of raising children, but the love of 2 people who truly understood each other. There was no script, no predefined destination. Just us, writing our own story, one chapter at a time. As the years passed, life with Mia settled into a rhythm that felt effortless. There was no tension about unspoken expectations, no underlying pressure to conform to a certain lifestyle. We were happy, and for a long time, that was enough. But life has a way of testing even the most stable of foundations. It started subtly, little shifts in our conversations, moments of silence where there had once been easy laughter. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Work had been demanding for both of us, and we were in the middle of deciding whether to buy a home together or continue renting. I told myself it was just a phase, that all relationships go through ebbs and flows. Then one evening, as we sat on our balcony watching the city lights flicker, Mia spoke words that sent a chill through me. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," she said, her voice careful, deliberate. I nodded, waiting. "I always thought I didn't want kids," she continued, not meeting my eyes. "But lately, I don't know. Something's changed." The words hit me like a slow-moving wave, crashing in parts rather than all at once. I took a breath, steadying myself. "What do you mean?" She turned to face me then, her expression unreadable. "I'm not saying I definitely want them. But I don't feel as certain as I once did. For a long time, I didn't speak. I wanted to be fair, to listen, to understand. But beneath that, I felt something I hadn't in years, fear. Mia had been the person who understood. She had been the one who didn't look at me with quiet disappointment when I said I didn't want to be a father. Now, she was questioning everything we had built. "Do you think it's just a passing thought?" I finally asked, trying to keep my voice even. She hesitated. That hesitation said more than words ever could. From that night on, something unspoken lingered between us. We tried to ignore it, to push it aside and pretend things were the same. But the truth was, a question had been asked, and neither of us could take it back. One day, I came home to find Mia sitting on the couch, her expression heavy with sadness. "I can't pretend this isn't on my mind," she admitted. "And I don't want to be the person who asks you to change who you are. But I also can't ignore that I might want something different." I nodded, my throat tight. "And if you do?" She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Then I don't know what that means for us." Love, as I had learned the hard way, wasn't always enough. Sometimes, two people could be perfect for each other in 100 different ways, except for the one that mattered most. We didn't end things that night. We spent weeks, then months, trying to navigate the uncertainty. But deep down, I think we both knew where it was heading. The day Mia left, it wasn't dramatic. There was no screaming, no anger, just the quiet grief of two people parting not because they didn't love each other, but because they loved each other too much to hold the other back. I watched her walk away, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of solitude press down on me again. I had made my choice long ago, and I still believed in it. But choices, no matter how certain, come with consequences. And for the first time in a long while, I wondered if I would regret mine. The silence after Mia left was deafening. I had spent so much of my life carving out a path that felt true to who I was, only to realize that even certainty had its own kind of loneliness. The nights felt longer, the space in my apartment larger. I wasn't grieving the loss of a future I had never wanted, I was grieving her. But life doesn't stop, even when your world feels a little emptier. At first, I threw myself into work. It was easier that way, filling my days with back-to-back meetings and projects, avoiding the quiet spaces where memories of Mia lingered. Friends checked in, inviting me out for drinks, but I wasn't in the mood to be the single guy at the table while they swapped stories about their kids and marriages. I told myself I needed time. Months passed. Then a year. Eventually, I tried dating again. I approached it with the same clarity I always had. I still didn't want kids, still wasn't interested in being a stepfather. But this time, there was something different. A nagging voice in the back of my mind whispering, what if this happens again? What if she changes her mind, too? I met women who seemed like a great match, only for the same old conversations to play out. So, do you think you'll ever change your mind? No. Not even a little? No. And just like that, another potential relationship would fizzle out. It wasn't that I regretted my stance. I knew myself too well to pretend otherwise. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was swimming against a current that kept pulling me further from everyone else. One night, over drinks, Greg, the same friend who once admitted to envying my freedom, gave me a knowing look. "You ever think about just taking a break from dating?" he asked. I scoffed. "I practically did for a year." "No, I mean really taking a break. No dating apps, no searching, no expectations. Just live." I wanted to argue, but I didn't have the energy. So I took his advice. For the first time in years, I stopped looking for someone. I traveled alone. I went on spontaneous road trips. I picked up old hobbies I had abandoned. I let my life be mine again, not some half-finished puzzle waiting for the right piece. And somewhere along the way, I realized something. I wasn't missing out. Yes, I had lost Mia, and that hurt. But not because I had chosen the wrong path. We had simply outgrown the version of ourselves that once fit so well together. And that was okay. One afternoon, while sitting at a coffee shop with a book in hand, I looked around and saw something I hadn't noticed in a long time: contentment. Not in other people, but in myself. For so long, I had been measuring my happiness against what society told me it should look like. Against the expectations of marriage, children, and family. But here, in this quiet moment, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. Not everyone's story follows the same arc. Some people find love early and build families. Others, like me, take a different path. It doesn't mean one is better than the other. It just means they're different. And maybe, just maybe, that was always the point. Life had a funny way of moving forward, even when I wasn't actively pushing it in any direction. The more time I spent alone, not in loneliness, but in true solitude, the more I realized I actually enjoyed it. I had spent years trying to find a relationship that fit me, but now, I was finally settling into my own life, without trying to force anything into it. But that didn't mean life wasn't full of surprises. One evening, after a long day at work, I found myself at a bookstore. It had become a bit of a ritual: grab a coffee, wander through the shelves, and let my mind drift. I was flipping through a novel when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Didn't take you for a poetry guy." I turned, and there she was. Mia. I hadn't seen her in nearly 2 years. Her hair was a little shorter, her face a little more refined, but the way she smiled, soft, knowing, was exactly the same. I exhaled a small laugh, closing the book. I like to keep people guessing. She tilted her head. "Do you?" The weight of our history settled between us, but there was no tension, no unresolved anger. Just the quiet understanding of two people who had once meant the world to each other. We talked. Not about the past, but about where we were now. Mia had moved to a new city for work but was visiting for the weekend. She was seeing someone, nothing serious, she assured me, just enjoying life. And for the first time, I didn't feel a pang of regret. When she finally stood to leave, she hesitated. "I'm really glad I ran into you," she said. "I always wondered how you were doing." "I'm good," I told her. And for the first time in a long time, I truly meant it. She smiled. "Yeah. You look it." And then she was gone. As I stood there, book still in hand, I realized something important: seeing Mia again didn't break me. It didn't pull me back into the past or make me question my choices. If anything, it affirmed them. Some people enter our lives to teach us things, to challenge us, to help us grow. And some people, no matter how much love there once was, are never meant to stay. I left the bookstore that night feeling lighter than I had in years. Not long after, life threw another curveball at me. I met someone. Not through an app, not through some grand, orchestrated search for love, but in the most unexpected, natural way. A mutual friend introduced us at a small gathering, and what started as casual conversation turned into something more. Her name was Clare. She was fiercely independent, adventurous, and most importantly, unapologetically herself. She wasn't looking to build a family, wasn't looking to fit into a mold. She had spent years defining her own happiness, and when we talked, there was no pressure. No expectations. Just two people who enjoyed each other's company. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't trying to find something. I was just living. And that, I realized, was enough. Claire and I fell into each other's lives effortlessly, like puzzle pieces that weren't looking to fit, but somehow just did. She had this quiet confidence about her, the kind that came from knowing exactly who she was and not needing anyone else to validate it. She was a photographer, traveling often for work, always chasing the next great shot. Her stories were filled with vibrant cities, hidden corners of the world, and fleeting moments captured in perfect light. Unlike Mia, she didn't ask me if I'd ever change my mind about kids. Unlike so many dates before her, she didn't tilt her head and say, "Are you sure you don't want that someday?" She just accepted it. Accepted me. It was refreshing. We took things slow, not out of hesitation, but because neither of us were in a rush. We had both built lives we loved, and being together wasn't about filling a void, it was about adding to something that was already whole. Months passed, then a year. We traveled together, but separately too. She'd disappear to Europe for a photography project, and I'd take solo road trips just because I could. There was no anxiety in the distance, no fear that space would pull us apart. If anything, it made the time we shared more meaningful. One evening, after she returned from a shoot in Morocco, we were sitting on my couch, legs tangled together, sipping wine. She showed me photos from her trip, her eyes lighting up as she described the people she met, the food she ate, the way the light hit the sand dunes at sunset. Then, she set her glass down and looked at me with that unreadable expression I was still learning to decipher. "I've been thinking," she said, voice slow, deliberate. My stomach clenched for half a second, not again. But then she smiled, reaching for my hand. I don't want marriage. Not in the traditional sense, at least. I exhaled, tension dissolving into quiet relief. Yeah? She nodded. I like us the way we are. No expectations. No pressure to follow some script that doesn't fit us. I smiled, squeezing her hand. Me too. And just like that, a conversation that had ended past relationships before never even had to be had. This was different. She was different. I had spent so much time fighting against the idea that I needed to live life a certain way, constantly defending my choices, explaining myself. But with Claire, there was nothing to defend. For the first time, I wasn't the odd one out at the dinner table. I wasn't the guy who didn't get it. I was just a man who had built a life that made sense to him, and somehow, I had found someone who wanted to walk beside me, not force me onto a different path. And that, I realized, was the only kind of love I ever needed. Years passed, and life unfolded in ways I never could have predicted. Claire and I stayed together, not because we had to, not because of some external expectation, but because we wanted to. And that made all the difference. We built a life that fit us, not the one society told us we should have. No marriage certificates, no shared last names, no white picket fence. Just two people who loved each other, who made space for each other's dreams without losing themselves in the process. We traveled together, but we also traveled apart. We celebrated wins, weathered losses, and embraced the kind of love that didn't require constant reassurance, it just was. And yet, even in this life of certainty, doubt had a way of creeping in. One night, as we sat on the balcony of a small cabin in the mountains, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Claire spoke softly. Do you ever wonder if we'll regret this? I turned to her, eyebrow raised. Regret what? She exhaled, swirling the wine in her glass. Not doing it the normal way. Not getting married. Not having kids. Not, she paused, searching for the right words. Not building the kind of life that most people do. I thought about it for a moment, then set my glass down. Maybe, I admitted. But I think regret comes no matter what path we choose. If we had kids, we'd probably wonder about the freedom we gave up. If we got married, maybe we'd wake up one day and feel trapped in something we didn't need. No matter what we do, there's always a road not taken. She nodded, absorbing my words. Then, a small smile tugged at her lips. So, we just make peace with our choice? I reached for her hand, fingers lacing through hers. I think we just live. And if, one day, we wake up and feel differently, we talk about it. We figure it out. Together. She squeezed my hand. Together. And that was it. No grand resolutions, no dramatic declarations. Just the quiet understanding that life is never about knowing for sure, it's about choosing, every day, to walk a path that feels right. Over the years, our friends' lives changed. Some got divorced, some had more kids, some settled into their roles as parents and partners. Greg, the friend who once envied my freedom, eventually admitted that fatherhood was both the best and hardest thing he'd ever done. One night, over drinks, he asked me, "So, do you still not regret it?" I looked over at Claire, who was laughing at something across the room, her eyes crinkling at the corners, completely at ease. And I smiled. Not for a second. Because in the end, happiness isn't about following the blueprint society lays out for you. It's about finding what feels right. And I had found mine. The end.